For as long as I could remember, my life was defined by the needs of others. As Victoria, I was the invisible force keeping my family afloat, a responsibility thrust upon me too young. My modest apartment, shared with my demanding mother and carefree younger sister, was less a home and more a factory where I, the sole worker, churned out their comfortable existence. Every late-night shift, every penny I earned went towards covering their lavish wants: designer clothes for my sister, expensive meals for my mother, the ever-increasing rent and utility bills, while I wore worn-out shoes, ate budget meals, and ignored my own exhaustion. I wasn't a daughter. I was their money machine, their maid, valued only for what I could provide, never for who I was. Their appreciation was non-existent, replaced by constant criticism and an air of entitlement that suffocated me. The simmering resentment reached a boiling point one evening during a particularly vicious argument about yet another unpaid bill, which I was expected to magically cover. My mother's words, sharp as daggers, cut through years of self-sacrifice. "You're a burden, Victoria. Get out." In that moment, something shifted within me. The usual instinct to apologize, to appease, to fix, vanished. For the first time, I saw the truth of my situation, not through their eyes, but my own. I didn't beg, I didn't plead. I simply nodded, the quiet strength surprising even myself. That night, I left. With a small bag holding my few treasured possessions, I walked out of that house and into an uncertain future. The next morning, I deactivated all shared bank accounts, canceled recurring payments, and consciously broke every financial tether that bound me to them. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and deeply liberating. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. My phone rang incessantly with desperate, then angry calls from my mother and sister as their carefully constructed world began to unravel. Bills went unpaid, luxuries became impossible, and the comfortable life they'd taken for granted evaporated. They soon realized that I, their supposed burden, had been the very foundation upholding their reality. But their pleas, their belated realization, held no sway over me. Their downfall was no longer my responsibility, their problems no longer mine to solve. I found a small, cheap room, took on extra shifts, and slowly, painstakingly began to build a life centered on my needs and my desires. Each small victory, a quiet evening alone, a new pair of shoes I bought for myself, the simple peace of an uninterrupted night's sleep was a testament to my newfound freedom. Leaving them behind wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of self-preservation. In the silence of my new independent existence, I finally began to discover who Victoria truly was, unburdened by expectations and dignified by my own strength. I was finally free. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and damp wool, a scent that had seeped into the peeling wallpaper of the apartment complex years ago and refused to leave. It was 11:45 p.m. My shift had ended 45 minutes ago, but the walk home took longer than usual because the soles of my black non-slip shoes had finally worn through, letting the icy bite of the pavement gnaw at my blistered heels with every step. I paused outside door 4B, resting my forehead against the cool, painted wood. My hand trembled as I reached for my keys. It wasn't the physical exhaustion that made me hesitate, though my back ached as if I'd been carrying stones and my legs felt like lead. It was the dread, the deep, heavy knot that formed in my stomach the moment I clocked out, knowing that the hardest part of my day was just beginning. I turned the key and pushed the door open. A wall of heat and the cloying scent of expensive vanilla candles hit me instantly. The apartment was stiflingly warm, the thermostat cranked up to 75 degrees despite the mild autumn weather. My eyes adjusted to the dim light of the living room, illuminated mostly by the oversized television mounted on the wall, a purchase I hadn't agreed to, paid for on a credit card I was struggling to pay off. "You're late," a voice called out from the sofa. It wasn't a greeting, it was an accusation. My mother, Eleanor, didn't look up from her phone. She was lounging in her silk robe, a glass of red wine balanced precariously on the armrest. Beside her, my younger sister, Bella, was cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by an explosion of shopping bags. The logos were familiar, taunting me. Zara, Sephora, a boutique downtown that sold jeans costing more than my weekly grocery budget. "I missed the bus," I said, my voice rasping. I hadn't had water in 6 hours. I kicked off my ruined shoes and placed them neatly by the door, trying to ignore the throbbing in my feet. The diner was short-staffed. I had to close. "Well, you made us wait," Bella chimed in, not looking away from the mirror where she was applying a layer of shimmering gloss to her lips. "Mom was going to order Thai, but her card got declined again. It was so embarrassing." I closed my eyes for a second, inhaling deeply, trying to summon the patience that had been chipped away, shift by shift, dollar by dollar. "The card was declined because it's maxed out, Bella. I told you both last week, no more takeout until I get paid on Friday." "Don't take that tone with your sister," my mother snapped, finally looking up. Her eyes were sharp, devoid of any maternal warmth, scanning me only to find faults. "And don't look at me like a martyr, Victoria. We're hungry. Is it a crime to want a hot meal?" I walked past them into the kitchenette. The sink was piled high with dishes, days' worth of crusty plates and wine glasses. The counter was sticky. I opened the fridge. It was nearly empty, save for a bottle of sparkling water and a few takeout containers that clearly belonged to them. There was nothing for me. I grabbed a slice of plain bread from the pantry and leaned against the counter, eating it dry. "There's a notice on the table," my mother said, her tone shifting from annoyed to dismissive. "Something about the electric." I froze, the dry bread turning to ash in my mouth. I walked back to the living room and saw the envelope sitting on the coffee table, stained with a ring of red wine. It was bright pink, a final notice. "Mom," I said, my voice low, trembling with a mixture of fatigue and panic. "This says we have 48 hours before they cut the power. Why didn't you give this to me when it arrived? The date stamp is from 3 days ago." "I don't read the mail, Victoria. That's your job," she said, taking a sip of wine. "You handle the finances. I have enough stress trying to manage this household." "Manage?" The word slipped out before I could stop it. I looked around the room. The mess, the shopping bags, the luxury amidst the squalor of unpaid bills. "I pay the rent. I pay the utilities. I buy the groceries. I work double shifts 6 days a week. What exactly are you managing?" The room went silent. The television blared a canned laugh track, a jarring contrast to the tension thickening the air. Bella stopped applying her lip gloss and looked at me with wide, mock-scandalized eyes. My mother set her wineglass down slowly. The click of the glass against the coaster echoed. "Excuse me," she whispered, her voice dangerous. "I can't do this anymore," I said. It wasn't a scream. It was a plea, a broken admission of defeat. "I don't have the money for the electric bill, Mom. I don't. I gave you $600 last week for the car payment, and now I see—" I gestured to the floor around Bella. "I see new clothes. Did you use the car money for clothes?" "Bella needed an outfit for the gala," my mother said, rising to her feet. She pulled her robe tighter, drawing herself up to her full height. "She has a reputation to maintain. She has friends, connections. She can't go out looking like a pauper just because you can't manage a budget properly." "I can't manage the budget because you spend every penny I earn," I cried out, the exhaustion finally giving way to hysteria. I am drowning. Look at my shoes. Look at me. I haven't bought myself a piece of clothing in 2 years. I'm eating dry bread for dinner while you drink $20 wine." "You selfish girl," my mother hissed, stepping closer. "After everything I've done for you, I raised you. I put a roof over your head." "I pay for the roof," I shouted, tears stinging my eyes, not of sadness, but of pure, white-hot frustration. "This is my lease. My name is on the bills. I am the only one working." "And you throw it in our faces every chance you get," interjected Bella, standing up to join the fray, sensing the blood in the water. "God, you're so dramatic, Victoria. It's just a bill. Figure it out. Pick up another shift or something. Stop ruining my night." I looked at my sister, 19 years old, beautiful, terrifyingly capable of manipulation, and completely detached from reality. Then I looked at my mother. Her face was twisted in a snarl of contempt. There wasn't love there. There wasn't even pity. There was only the anger of a parasite sensing the host was resisting. "I can't pick up another shift," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I am tired. I am so tired." "We are all tired," my mother shouted, slamming her hand onto the back of the sofa. "You think it's easy for me, watching my life crumble while my daughter, my own daughter, hoards money and lies about bills just to make us suffer? You want to control us. That's what this is, financial abuse." The accusation was so absurd, so inversely proportional to the truth, that I actually laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Financial abuse?" I repeated. "I have $11 in my checking account."
"Because you're incompetent," my mother screamed. She was shaking now, her face flushed red. "You are useless. Your father would be ashamed of you. He worked himself to the bone for us, and you can't even keep the lights on?" The mention of my father felt like a slap. He had worked himself to death, and now they were ensuring I did the same. "I am not father," I said steadily, "and I am not a machine." "No," my mother spat, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You're a weight. That's what you are, a heavy, miserable anchor dragging us both down with your negativity and your incompetence." She pointed a manicured finger at the door. "You're a burden, Victoria. If you don't want to help this family, then get out. We don't need your attitude. We don't need you holding us back. Get out." The words hung in the air, sharp as daggers. "You're a burden?" Time seemed to warp. The blaring TV faded into a dull hum. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, her face contorted with entitlement. I looked at the sister I had practically raised, who was now scrolling on her phone again, bored by the argument. Am I the burden? I looked down at my hands. They were chapped, red from scrubbing tables and washing dishes. I thought of the anxiety attacks, the skipped meals, the constant crushing pressure to be enough, to give more, to fix everything. If I was the burden, then leaving would be doing them a favor. The realization didn't hit me like a lightning bolt. It washed over me like a calm, cooling tide. The instinct to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to promise I'd fix the electric bill somehow, it just vanished. It was simply gone, incinerated by the sheer audacity of her statement. I didn't scream back. I didn't cry. I felt my posture straighten, the ache in my back suddenly irrelevant. "Okay," I said. The word was soft, barely louder than the hum of the refrigerator. My mother blinked, expecting a fight, expecting tears. "What?" "Okay," I said again, louder this time. The clarity was intoxicating. "You're right. I should go." I turned my back on them. I walked into the small bedroom I shared with the ironing board and the vacuum cleaner. I didn't pack everything. I didn't want everything. I took my passport, my birth certificate, the small wooden box containing the locket my father gave me.
I took 3 pairs of underwear, 2 t-shirts, and my warm gray hoodie. I grabbed my charger. I zipped the bag. It was light. My entire life distilled down to 10 pounds of essentials. When I walked back into the living room, my mother was still standing there. Her posture had faltered. The anger was replaced with confusion, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She watched me put on my worn-out coat. She watched me step into my ruined shoes, wincing slightly as my heels touched the raw leather. "Stop the dramatics," my mother scoffed, though her voice lacked its earlier venom. "Where do you think you're going at midnight? You have work in the morning." I looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time, I didn't see a giant, looming authority figure. I saw a small, bitter woman standing in a room full of things she hadn't earned, terrified that the gravity was about to shift.
"I'm leaving, Mother," I said. My voice was steady, foreign to my own ears. "I'm removing the burden." "Don't be stupid," she snapped, taking a step forward. "Put the bag down. You need to pay the electric bill online before you go to sleep." I walked past her. I didn't flinch when she reached out to grab my arm. I just sidestepped, moving with a fluidity I didn't know I possessed. "Victoria," Bella said, standing up, her phone finally forgotten. "Seriously, stop. Who's going to drive me to the venue tomorrow?" I reached the door. The handle felt cold and solid under my hand. "Victoria, if you walk out that door, don't you dare come crawling back," my mother screamed, her voice rising to a shriek, panic finally setting in beneath the rage. "I mean it. You turn your back on this family and you are dead to us." I paused for one heartbeat. I thought about the cold outside. I thought about the fact that I had nowhere to go. I thought about the uncertainty of the dark streets. And then I thought about staying. I thought about the electric bill. I thought about the years of being the invisible engine of this factory. The choice wasn't hard. It wasn't even a choice. I opened the door. The hallway air was frigid, smelling of boiled cabbage and freedom. "Goodbye, Mother," I said. I stepped out and pulled the door shut behind me. The click of the latch engaging was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I didn't wait for them to open it. I didn't wait for the shouting that was surely starting on the other side. I walked down the hallway, past the peeling wallpaper. I descended the stairs, my worn-out shoes making a rhythmic thud on the concrete. Thud, thud, thud. I pushed open the main building door and stepped out into the night. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the neon lights of the city. It was cold, but for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel the chill. I felt a fire in my chest, a terrifying, exhilarating inferno of possibility. I gripped the handle of my bag tighter and began to walk. I didn't look back. The front door didn't slam. That would have been too dramatic, too much like the tantrums my sister Chloe threw when a dress didn't fit, or the explosive rage my mother unleashed when the world failed to bend to her will. No, the door simply clicked shut. It was a mechanical, final sound, like the snapping of a lock or the breaking of a bone. I stood on the concrete landing, the cool night air biting through the thin fabric of my windbreaker. For a moment, I just breathed. The air out here tasted different, sharp, laced with the metallic tang of approaching rain and the exhaust of distant traffic, but notably absent of the cloying perfume my mother sprayed liberally to mask the scent of our stagnant lives. My hand trembled, not from cold, but from a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline. I gripped the handle of my duffel bag until my knuckles turned white. It was an old gym bag, one I had bought at a thrift store years ago, and inside it rested the sum of my existence: 3 changes of clothes, my toiletries, a battered laptop, and the envelope of emergency cash I had been siphoning off from my grocery budget for 2 years, $20 here, 10 there. I walked. I didn't know where I was going, only that the pavement beneath my worn sneakers felt solid in a way the floorboards of the apartment never had. The streetlights hummed overhead,
casting long, jaundiced shadows that stretched out before me like uncertain paths. Every step took me further away from the shouting that I knew was still echoing in the kitchen, further away from the label of burden that had been seared into my skin less than an hour ago. I found a cheap motel 6 blocks away, the kind with a neon sign that flickered with an incessant nervy twitch. The lobby smelled of stale coffee and industrial lemon cleaner. The clerk, a man with heavy eyelids and a stain on his collar, didn't look up from his phone as I slid my ID and cash across the counter. "One night?" he grunted. "Maybe 2, I whispered, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. It was the first time in years I had spoken a decision without checking a text message for approval first. Room 104 was small, the carpet threadbare and sticky, the wallpaper peeling at the seams. But as I locked the deadbolt and slid the chain into place, the silence that filled the room was the most luxurious thing I had ever experienced. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the blank television screen. I waited for the guilt to come. I waited for the crushing panic that I had abandoned them, that the electricity would be cut off, that they wouldn't know how to boil water for tea. But the guilt didn't come. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity washed over me. I was not a person to them. I was infrastructure, and infrastructure does not feel guilt when it is decommissioned. I didn't sleep well, but I rested. I lay awake, watching the headlights of passing cars sweep across the ceiling, plotting the dismantling of the life I had built for them. The morning brought a gray, diffident light, and the realization that the hardest part was about to begin. I sat at the small, wobbly desk in the corner of the room, my phone placed face down like a weapon I was afraid to touch. It had been vibrating since 7 a.m. I turned it over. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. "Chloe, 7:15 a.m. Where are you? I need the car keys." "Chloe, 7:32 a.m. Vic, seriously? I'm going to be late for brunch." "Mom, 8:05 a.m. Stop this childish nonsense and come home. We need groceries." "Mom, 8:10 a.m. Victoria, pick up the phone." I stared at the messages, dissecting them like specimens under a microscope. There was no, "Are you okay?" There was no, "I'm sorry." There was only the immediate, panicked realization that the service provider was offline. I opened my banking app. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and damp wool, a scent that had seeped into the peeling wallpaper of the apartment complex years ago and refused to leave. It was 11:45 p.m. My shift had ended 45 minutes ago, but the walk home took longer than usual because the soles of my black non-slip shoes had finally worn through, letting the icy bite of the pavement gnaw at my blistered heels with every step. I paused outside door 4B, resting my forehead against the cool, painted wood. My hand trembled as I reached for my keys. It wasn't the physical exhaustion that made me hesitate, though my back ached as if I'd been carrying stones and my legs felt like lead. It was the dread, the deep, heavy knot that formed in my stomach the moment I clocked out, knowing that the hardest part of my day was just beginning. I turned the key and pushed the door open. A wall of heat and the cloying scent of expensive vanilla candles hit me instantly. The apartment was stiflingly warm, the thermostat cranked up to 75 degrees despite the mild autumn weather. My eyes adjusted to the dim light of the living room, illuminated mostly by the oversized television mounted on the wall, a purchase I hadn't agreed to, paid for on a credit card I was struggling to pay off. "You're late," a voice called out from the sofa. It wasn't a greeting, it was an accusation. My mother, Eleanor, didn't look up from her phone. She was lounging in her silk robe, a glass of red wine balanced precariously on the armrest. Beside her, my younger sister, Bella, was cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by an explosion of shopping bags. The logos were familiar, taunting me. Zara, Sephora, a boutique downtown that sold jeans costing more than my weekly grocery budget. I missed the bus, I said, my voice rasping. I hadn't had water in 6 hours. I kicked off my ruined shoes and placed them neatly by the door, trying to ignore the throbbing in my feet. The diner was short-staffed. I had to close. "Well, you made us wait," Bella chimed in, not looking away from the mirror where she was applying a layer of shimmering gloss to her lips. "Mom was going to order Thai, but her card got declined again. It was so embarrassing." I closed my eyes for a second, inhaling deeply, trying to summon the patience that had been chipped away, shift by shift, dollar by dollar. "The card was declined because it's maxed out, Bella. I told you both last week, no more takeout until I get paid on Friday." "Don't take that tone with your sister," my mother snapped, finally looking up. Her eyes were sharp, devoid of any maternal warmth, scanning me only to find faults. "And don't look at me like a martyr, Victoria. We're hungry. Is it a crime to want a hot meal?"
"What are you talking about? Mom!" I heard the rustle of the phone being passed, the muffled sounds of a frantic exchange. "Victoria, Anne." My mother's voice was ice, low and dangerous. It was the tone that usually made me scramble to apologize, to fix, to smooth over. "You have 5 seconds to explain why you are humiliating your sister in public." "I left, Mom. You told me to leave." "Don't be dramatic. I was angry. You know how I get. Now unlock the card and come home. The kitchen is a mess and I have a migraine coming on." The casual dismissal of her cruelty took my breath away. She truly believed that yesterday was just another scene in our play, that I would return to my role because I had nowhere else to go. "I'm not coming back," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "And the accounts are closed. The cards are canceled. You'll have to use your own pension for the bills this month." There was a silence on the other end, profound and heavy. "You can't do that," she whispered, the entitlement cracking to reveal a sliver of genuine fear. "The rent is due in 3 days. The electric—" "The rent is in your name," I reminded her, "and so is the electric bill. I just paid them for you, for years." "You ungrateful little wretch," she hissed, the volume rising. "After everything I've done for you, I gave you life. I put a roof over your head. And I paid for the roof. I paid for the food, the clothes, the wine, the internet, and the gas. I paid for everything, and you called me a burden. You are a burden. You're hurting this family right now. You're selfish." "If I'm a burden," I said, my hand shaking uncontrollably now, "then I'm doing you a favor. I'm removing myself. Victoria, if you hang up this phone— Goodbye, Mom." I ended the call. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I powered the phone down completely. The black screen reflected my face, pale, dark circles under my eyes, hair messy, but the eyes were different. They were wide open. I spent the next 3 hours in a fugue state of logistics. I couldn't stay at the motel. At $80 a night, it would bleed my meager savings dry in 2 weeks. I needed a base of operations, something permanent, something cheap. I went to the public library 3 blocks down. The warmth of the building was comforting, the smell of old paper and dust acting as a balm to my frayed nerves. I commandeered a computer terminal and scoured the classifieds. Luxury condo downtown. Skipped. 2-bedroom family neighborhood. Skipped. I couldn't handle people. Not yet. I found it on the 4th page of results, buried under bold fonts and exclamation points. Studio, basement level, no pets, cash preferred, immediate occupancy. The address was in the industrial district, a part of the city where the residential blocks bled into warehouses and auto body shops. The rent was suspiciously low. It was perfect. I walked the 2 miles to the address. The neighborhood was gritty, the sidewalks cracked and sprouting stubborn weeds.
The house was a peeling Victorian that had been carved up into multiple units decades ago. I met the landlord, Mr. Henderson, on the porch. He was a man made of rough angles and gray stubble, wearing a grease-stained vest. He looked me up and down, taking in the duffel bag and the nervous energy radiating off me.
"It ain't the Ritz," he said, spitting onto the lawn. "Basement unit, entrance around back. You got the deposit?" "I have cash," I said. He nodded, seemingly uninterested in my story, which was the greatest kindness he could have offered. He led me around the side of the house, down a narrow concrete stairwell that smelled of damp earth and moss. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room was small. Studio was a generous term. It was essentially a large box with a kitchenette shoved into one corner and a bathroom behind a thin accordion door. The floor was linoleum, patterned in a dizzying beige square design from the 70s. There was a single window, high up on the wall, ground level with the outside world, offering a view of passing ankles and car tires. It was damp, it was dark, it was ugly. "It's perfect," I said. Mr. Henderson raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. "Utilities included. Wi-Fi is spotty. Don't make noise after 10. I counted out the cash, first month and security deposit. It took a significant chunk of my envelope, leaving me with a terrifyingly thin stack of bills. Mr. Henderson counted it twice, licked his thumb, nodded, and handed me a single brass key. "Yours," he grunted, and trudged back up the stairs. I closed the door, I locked it, I engaged the deadbolt. I stood in the center of the room. The silence here was different than the motel. It was heavier, deeper. It was the silence of underground. I set my bag on the floor. I didn't have a bed yet, just a sleeping bag I'd packed at the last minute. I unrolled it in the center of the room. I walked over to the kitchenette. The fridge hummed with a rattle, the only other living thing in the space. I opened it. It was empty and smelled of baking soda. My phone, which I had turned back on during the walk, began to buzz again in my pocket. It was a relentless, angry vibration against my thigh. I pulled it out. 42 missed calls, 68 text messages. "Chloe, they're towing the car. Victoria, they are towing the car." "Mom, I'm calling the police. I'm telling them you stole from us." "Mom, please, I'm dizzy. I need my medication." "Chloe, everyone hates you. You ruined everything." I read them all. I forced myself to read every single word. The venom, the manipulation, the panicked flailing of two people who had forgotten how to swim because I had spent my life acting as their raft. I felt a phantom pull, a twitch in my muscles to run, to go back, to pay the tow truck driver, to pick up the prescription. It was a physical ache, an addiction withdrawal. But I looked at the brass key sitting on the cheap laminate counter. I looked at the high window where the afternoon light was fading into a bruised purple. I sat down on the floor, leaning my back against the cool wall. My stomach growled, a reminder that I hadn't eaten since yesterday lunch. I had $5 in change in my pocket, enough for a can of soup and maybe a loaf of bread from the corner store I'd passed. I typed a single message. I didn't send it to Chloe, and I didn't send it to my mother. I sent it to the group chat we had shared for years, the one titled Family. "I am not coming back. Do not contact me. Figure it out." Then I blocked their numbers. First Mom, then Chloe. The silence that followed was absolute. The buzzing stopped. The screen went dark. I sat there as the room dimmed, shadows stretching from the corners to wrap around me. For the first time in my life, the darkness wasn't scary. It was a blanket. The air in the room was stale, but as I inhaled, filling my lungs until they pressed against my ribs, I realized something profound. I was hungry. I was cold. I was sleeping on a linoleum floor in a basement that smelled of mildew. But the air was mine. The silence was mine. I closed my eyes and let the tears finally come, hot and fast. Not tears of grief, but of sheer, overwhelming relief. I was alone, and in the echo of that silence, I began to hear the faint, tentative beat of my own heart. The peeling wallpaper in my new room was a faded, jaundiced yellow, the color of old bruises. It curled at the corners near the ceiling, revealing the rough plaster beneath, and the single window looked out onto a brick wall in an alleyway that smelled perpetually of damp cardboard and refuse. To anyone else, this room, scarcely larger than a walk-in closet, would have been a symbol of rock bottom. But as I woke up on my third morning, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like a map of an unknown country, I didn't feel despair. I felt a strange, vibrating stillness. There was no shouting. That was the first thing to hit me every time I opened my eyes. No shrill demand for coffee, no slamming doors, no frantic accusations about a missing hairbrush or a wrinkled blouse. The silence was heavy, physical. It pressed against my eardrums, initially unnerving in its intensity, before settling into a soft, protective blanket. I sat up, the springs of the second-hand mattress groaning in protest. My back ached, a familiar companion, but the tension that usually coiled like a viper at the base of my neck was gone. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. My feet touched the cold linoleum, and I curled my toes. My floor, my cold. The routine of survival had to continue, of course. Independence was expensive, even in a shoebox like this. I dressed quickly, pulling on my uniform for the diner. The black trousers were fraying at the hem, and the white shirt had been washed so many times it was bordering on translucent gray, but they were clean. My phone, resting on the overturned milk crate I was using as a nightstand, remained dark. I had changed my number the day after I left, a logistical nightmare that had felt like amputating a limb. The phantom buzzing, the anticipation of my mother's rage or my sister's whining still haunted me, making my heart stutter every time a car horn blared outside, but the screen remained blessedly blank. The air at the Greasy Spoon was thick with the scent of frying bacon and stale coffee. It was a chaotic ecosystem of clattering porcelain and shouting cooks, a place where I usually kept my head down, invisible, just another pair of hands. "Vic, table 4 needs a refill, and the guy at the counter is asking for more syrup," called out Jerry, the shift manager, wiping sweat from the back of a hairy hand. "On it," I said. My voice sounded different to my own ears, steadier, deeper. I moved through the shift with mechanical precision, but my mind was elsewhere. I was calculating, always calculating, but the variables had changed. Instead of factoring in my mother's insulin copay, which she spent on bingo, or my sister's emergency concert tickets, the equation was linear. Rent, utilities, food, me. Around 2 p.m., the lunch rush died down. I found myself standing near the prep station, counting my tips. "You're working a double again?" I looked up to see Sarah, a waitress who had worked here for 10 years. She was leaning against the counter, lighting a cigarette she wasn't supposed to smoke indoors. "Yeah," I said, tucking the bills into my apron. "I need the hours."
Sarah exhaled a plume of smoke, eyeing me critically. "You usually look like you're about to snap in half by this time of day. You know, that hunted animal look. You don't look like that today." "Don't I?" "No, you look focused. Did you finally kick that deadbeat boyfriend out?" I let out a short, dry laugh. "Something like that. Family." "Ah, worse than boyfriends," she grunted, tapping ash into a coffee cup. "Well, keep the change from table 6. Old man Henderson left a 10. I don't need it as bad as you look like you do." I started to protest, the reflex to refuse charity rising in my throat, the pride my mother had instilled in me even while she picked my pockets clean. "We don't take handouts, Victoria." But I stopped. I looked at the $10 bill on the counter. "Thank you, Sarah," I said quietly. "Don't spend it all on candy," she winked, pushing off the counter. When I finally clocked out, the sun was dipping low, casting long, bruised shadows across the pavement. My feet were throbbing, a dull, rhythmic pain that usually signaled the start of my second shift at home. cleaning, cooking, mediating. But as I stepped onto the sidewalk, the realization hit me again. There was no second shift. I walked toward the grocery store. This was the test. The automatic doors slid open, blasting me with air conditioning. I grabbed a basket, the plastic handle digging into my palm. I walked down the aisles, my body on autopilot. My hand reached for the brand name cereal my sister insisted on, the sugary flakes that cost $6 a box. My fingers brushed the cardboard before I froze. I hate this cereal. I pulled my hand back as if the box were hot. I stood there in the middle of aisle 4, people maneuvering their carts around me, staring at the shelf. I didn't have to buy it. I didn't have to buy the expensive white bread my mother liked because she claimed the crusts on the cheap stuff were too hard. I moved to the produce section. I picked up a bag of spinach, a carton of eggs, a loaf of generic whole wheat bread. I walked past the frozen pizzas, the staple of my sister's diet, and paused at the spice rack. I picked up a jar of crushed red pepper and a small bottle of garlic powder. At the checkout, the total came to $22. I stared at the display. Usually, a grocery run was a $100 affair, filled with guilt trips and impulse items I was forced to add to the cart. $22. I paid, the transaction smooth, quiet, and devoid of drama. Walking home, I passed a shoe store. It was a mid-range place, nothing fancy, but usually entirely out of my budget. I stopped. My reflection in the glass was ghostly, a woman in a faded coat holding a bag of spinach. I looked down at my shoes. The sole of the right sneaker was separating from the canvas, held together by a prayer and a dab of superglue I'd applied weeks ago. The damp from the street was seeping into my sock. "You're a burden." The voice was my mother's, sharp and clear in my memory. But the context had changed. If I was a burden, who was carrying me now? Only me, and I couldn't carry myself on broken soles. I pushed the door open. A bell chimed overhead. The smell of leather and rubber was intoxicatingly new. A young clerk approached, his smile practiced. "Can I help you find something?" I need something specifically for walking and standing, for long periods," I stammered, feeling suddenly out of place. I felt like an imposter, someone who should be shopping at the thrift store, not here where things were clean and boxed. "We have some great support insoles in this aisle," he said, gesturing. "What size?" 7. I sat on the small stool, unlacing my ruined sneakers. I felt a flush of shame as I pulled my foot out, revealing the worn heel of my sock. The clerk didn't blink. He handed me a box. They were black, simple, with a thick, cushioned sole. Not fashionable, but functional. I slipped my foot inside. It felt like stepping onto a cloud. The arch support pushed up against my tired foot, relieving the pressure instantly. "How do they feel?" "Good," I whispered. "They feel necessary." I looked at the price tag on the box. $60. It was a fortune. It was 3 extra shifts. It was the electricity bill. But then I did the math, the real math. I wasn't paying for my sister's data plan this month. I wasn't paying for my mother's specialized herbal teas. The money I had earned today, plus the tip from Sarah, plus what I had saved by not buying the expensive groceries. "I'll take them," I said, my voice firming up. "I'll wear them out." "Sure thing." I left my old shoes in the trash can behind the counter. Walking out of the store, I felt a spring in my step that defied the 12 hours I had just worked. I could feel the pavement under me, but the bite was gone. I was protected. I had protected myself. Back in my room, the silence greeted me again. I locked the door, a solid, decisive click that was becoming my favorite sound in the world. I set up a small hot plate on the counter. I whisked 2 eggs with the garlic powder and red pepper. I wilted the spinach in the pan. The smell filled the small room, savory and spicy. My mother hated the smell of garlic. She said it was low class. My sister wouldn't eat anything green. I sat on the edge of the bed with my plate.
There was no dining table, no television, just me, the peeling yellow wallpaper, and a plate of scrambled eggs. I took a bite. It was hot, spicy, and perfect. For the first time in years, I ate slowly. I didn't shovel food into my mouth standing over the sink, ready to run at the first call of my name. I tasted the yolk. I tasted the heat of the pepper. Tears pricked my eyes, surprising me. I wasn't sad. I wasn't lonely. I was overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the peace. I looked at my new shoes, sitting neatly by the door. They were mine. This food was mine. This quiet, dusty air was mine. I finished the meal and washed the single plate and fork in the tiny bathroom sink. I dried them and set them on a paper towel. Night had fully fallen. The streetlight outside the window cast a grid of shadows across the floor. I turned off the overhead bulb and lay down. The anxiety that usually plagued my nights, the mental checklist of bills to juggle, apologies to make, moods to manage, tried to surface, but found no purchase. There was no crisis to avert, no fire to put out. I stretched my legs out, feeling the cool sheets. A car drove by outside, music thumping bass-heavy into the night, fading away into the distance. "Who are you?" the silence seemed to ask. I wasn't the provider anymore. I wasn't the scapegoat. I wasn't the money machine. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythm of my own breathing. "I'm Victoria," I whispered into the dark, testing the weight of the name. It didn't feel like a summons. It felt like a declaration. For the first time in my life, I didn't dream of drowning. I simply slept. The fluorescent lights of the department store hummed with a low electric vibration that used to induce a specific kind of headache behind my eyes. It was the frequency of anxiety, the soundtrack to countless hours spent trailing behind my mother and Bella, my hands clutching a maxed-out credit card while my stomach churned with the math of survival. But today, the hum was just background noise. It was a Saturday in late October, the air outside crisp with the promise of autumn, and for the first time in my life, I was shopping for a coat because I needed one, not because Bella had decided her perfectly good winter wardrobe was last season. I ran my hand down the sleeve of a charcoal wool trench coat. It was heavy, structured, and practical. The price tag dangling from a silver cord made me pause. It was $80. 6 months ago, $80 was the difference between keeping the lights on or sitting in the dark. Now, it was a calculated expense, budget approved and guilt-free. I slipped my arms into the sleeves, pulling the fabric tight around my waist. In the trifold mirror, the woman staring back looked different. The perpetual dark circles had faded to faint shadows, and my posture, once permanently hunched in anticipation of a verbal blow, was straighter. "It looks lovely on you," a sales associate said, passing by with a bundle of hangers. "Thank you," I replied, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, calm, unhurried. "I think I'll take it." As I made my way toward the register, navigating the labyrinth of perfume counters and jewelry displays, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a visual change, but an auditory one. A sound cut through the ambient chatter and soft pop music, a sharp, rising inflection that triggered a dormant reflex in my nervous system. My heart hammered against my ribs before my brain even registered why. "I don't care what the sign said, look at the receipt." The voice was unmistakable. It was shrill, laced with an entitlement that disregarded the humanity of anyone on the receiving end. My mother. I froze near a display of silk scarves, ducking instinctively behind a mannequin draped in crimson. My first impulse was to run, to drop the coat and bolt for the exit. The old Victoria, the terrified daughter, wanted to vanish. But the new Victoria, the one who paid her own rent and slept 8 hours a night, forced her feet to stay planted. Slowly, carefully, I peered around the edge of the display. They were standing at the cosmetics counter, about 20 feet away. The sight of them was like looking at a photograph left out in the rain, familiar but distorted, the colors bleeding and the edges frayed.
My mother was wearing her favorite beige structured blazer, the one she used to berate me for not dry cleaning fast enough. But now it looked tired. There was a noticeable coffee stain on the lapel, and the fabric pulled tight across her midsection, crying out for a tailor she could no longer afford. Her hair, usually a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde lacquer, showed an inch of stark gray roots. Beside her stood Bella, my younger sister, the princess I had sacrificed my youth to spoil, looked less like royalty and more like a sulking child. She was wearing designer jeans that I recognized. I had paid for them 6 months ago, but they were unwashed, losing their shape at the knees. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her face twisted in a scowl that deepened the lines around her mouth. "Ma'am, the card was declined," the young cashier said, her voice trembling slightly. "I tried it twice." "Then your machine is broken," my mother snapped, her manicured finger tapping aggressively on the glass counter. "Try it again, and don't look at me with that attitude." "Mom, stop it," Bella hissed, leaning in. "Everyone is looking. Just use the other one." "The other one is maxed, Bella, because someone had to have that ridiculous purse last week," my mother shot back, her voice not lowering an octave. "I needed it for the interview, which, by the way, I didn't get because you wouldn't drive me." Bella's voice cracked, sounding thin and desperate. I watched, mesmerized. It was a scene I had lived 1,000 times, but with one crucial difference. I wasn't the buffer. I wasn't the sponge absorbing their toxicity to keep the peace. I was an observer, separated by 20 feet of linoleum and an ocean of hard-won independence. "Well, I can't pay for this cream," my mother announced, shoving the small jar back toward the cashier as if it were contaminated. "This store has gone downhill anyway. Come on, Bella." "I'm not leaving until I get my foundation," Bella whined, stomping her foot, a gesture that looked cute at 5 but grotesque at 22. "I'm out, Mom. I look hideous." "You look hideous because you're frowning. You're ungrateful, just like your sister. A burden, the both of you." The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. "Just like your sister." A strange sensation washed over me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was pity, cold, distant pity. Without me there to target, the beast of their dysfunction had turned on itself. They were cannibalizing each other, consuming the little goodwill that remained between them, because there was no third party to feed into the machine. They turned to leave, and I knew I should retreat. I should turn around and walk toward the menswear section, loop back to the exit, and disappear. But I didn't. I stood my ground, my hand gripping the wool of the coat I was going to buy for myself. As they marched down the main aisle, fleeing the embarrassment of the declined card, Bella's eyes scanned the crowd, perhaps looking for a witness to her misery. Her gaze swept over the mannequin, over the scarves, and then locked onto me. She stopped dead. The kinetic energy of her angry walk dissipated instantly. "Victoria!" she breathed. It was barely a whisper. In the sudden vacuum of my focus, it sounded like a shout. My mother stopped a few paces ahead and turned, following Bella's gaze. When she saw me, her face went through a complex gymnastics of emotion. First shock, then recognition, and finally a terrifying flash of hope. It was the look of a drowning woman spotting a life raft. "Victoria!" My mother's voice shifted instantly from the harsh bark she used with the cashier to a cloying, wheedling tone. She moved to close the distance, ignoring the scene she had just caused, ignoring the months of silence, ignoring the fact that she had thrown me out like garbage. She saw her ATM standing by the silk scarves. "We've been so worried," she lied, the falsehood dripping from her lips like oil. "Bella, look, it's your sister. We were just talking about you." "You look good," Bella said, her eyes traveling up and down my figure. She was assessing my clothes, calculating the value of my well-being. "Is that a new coat?" "It is," I said. My voice was steady, grounded. I didn't back away, but I didn't step forward either. I stood like a statue, immutable. "Good, good," my mother said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her frantic eyes. "Listen, Vicky, honey, we're in a bit of a bind. Just a silly bank error, you know how it is. If you could just cover this little thing for me, we can go grab lunch. My treat. Well, we can talk about it. We miss you so much." The audacity was breathtaking. It was a physical weight pressing against my chest. She honestly believed that a smile and a pet name could erase the reality of my eviction. She thought the tether she had snapped could be retied simply because she needed money. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw her desperate tilt of her head, the twitch in her eye. I saw Bella standing behind her, chewing on her thumbnail, waiting for me to fix it, waiting for me to pull out the card, apologize for being away, and resume my position as the foundation of their crumbling house. For months, I had wondered what I would say if this moment came. I had rehearsed speeches full of righteous anger. I had imagined screaming, crying, throwing their cruelty back in their faces. But now that I was here, the anger wasn't there. There was no need to scream at a storm. You just closed the shutters. "No," I said. The word was small, quiet, and absolute. My mother blinked, her smile faltering. "What?" "No," I repeated. "I won't pay for it, and I'm not having lunch with you." "Victoria, don't be spiteful," my mother hissed, the mask slipping instantly to reveal the predator beneath. "After everything I've done for you, you're going to leave your mother and sister stranded here?" "You aren't stranded," I said, surprised by the clarity of my own thoughts. "I'm not part of that life anymore." "You selfish little—" Bella started, stepping forward, her face flushing red. "I am," I interrupted, looking her dead in the eye. "I am selfish, finally, and I worked hard to get here." I looked back at my mother. The hope in her eyes had curdled into hatred, the same hatred I had seen the night she told me to get out. But this time, it couldn't hurt me. It was like watching a tiger behind thick glass. It could snarl and pace, but it couldn't bite. "I have to go," I said. "I have a coat to buy." "If you walk away," my mother threatened, her voice rising again, drawing the attention of nearby shoppers, "don't you dare think you can come crawling back when you fail. You are nothing without us." I paused, turning my back to them. The words hit my spine, but they didn't penetrate. I looked at the checkout counter ahead, at the bright lights, at the open space. "I think," I said, half to myself, half to the air between us, "that I was nothing with you." I didn't wait for a response. I walked to the register, my stride long and purposeful. Behind me, I heard my mother shouting something about ungrateful children, her voice mixing with Bella's complaints, but the sounds grew fainter with every step. They were becoming part of the background noise again, a radio station fading into static as I drove out of range. At the counter, I handed the cashier my card, my debit card, linked to a bank account that bore only my name. "Sorry about the commotion back there," I told the cashier softly. She looked at me with sympathetic eyes. "Family?" "Not anymore," I answered. The transaction approved with a cheerful beep. I took the bag, heavy with the weight of quality wool and self-respect. Walking out of the mall sliding doors, the autumn air hit my face, cool and clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs until they ached pleasantly. My hands were shaking slightly, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally catching up to me, but beneath the tremors was a profound, vibrating sense of peace. I had seen the monsters under the bed in the daylight, and they were just small, sad people who didn't know how to live without a victim. I walked toward the bus stop, the plastic handles of the shopping bag digging into my palm. It was a sensation of reality, of ownership. I checked my watch. I had enough time to go home, make a pot of tea, and read for 2 hours before my shift started. The evening stretched out before me, unblemished by demands, unthreatened by crises.
As the bus pulled up, hissing its brakes, I boarded and took a seat by the window. I watched the mall recede as we drove away, becoming just another building in the rearview mirror. A smile, genuine and unpremeditated, touched my lips. I was alone, but for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't lonely. I was free. The sunlight that filtered into my new apartment was different from the light that used to struggle through the grimy, heavy curtains of my mother's house. This light was unfiltered, golden, and mine. It spilled across the polished oak of the small dining table I had assembled myself, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the silence. Silence. That was the most expensive luxury I had acquired, and yet it cost me nothing but the courage to leave. I sat with a ceramic mug warmed between my palms, the steam curling up in lazy ribbons. It was Earl Grey, a flavor I had discovered I adored only 3 weeks ago. For years, the kitchen cupboards had been stocked exclusively with the sugary instant coffee my mother drank, or the diet herbal teas my sister insisted on buying but never consuming. I took a slow sip, the bergamot sharp and floral on my tongue, and closed my eyes. There was no shouting, no heavy footsteps stomping down the hallway, no shrill demand for a starched shirt or a $20 bill for a cab. My heart rate, which had spent 2 decades idling at a panic-induced gallop, had finally slowed to a steady, rhythmic thrum. I set the mug down on a cork coaster, another small purchase that felt like a victory, and looked around the room. It wasn't a palace, it was a 1-bedroom unit in a quiet complex on the edge of town, far enough away that I didn't run into people from my old life, but close enough to my new job. The walls were painted a soft, creamy white, a blank canvas I had chosen specifically because it felt clean, uncluttered. "Time to go," I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded strong, lacking the tremor of apology that used to haunt it. I grabbed my tote bag and headed out. Today was Saturday, and for the first time in my adult life, Saturday did not mean chore day or extra shift day. It meant whatever I wanted it to mean. My new job as an administrative coordinator for a logistics firm was demanding, but in a way that fed me rather than consumed me. I was paid for my organization, my foresight, and my reliability, traits my family had exploited for free. The paycheck that hit my account every 2 weeks was mine, all of it. After rent and savings, there was a surplus. I still checked my banking app with a flinch of anxiety, waiting to see the numbers plummet because of a secret withdrawal or an emergency transfer I'd been guilted into making. But the numbers stayed put, growing steadily, a numerical testament to my freedom. I walked down the street, the autumn air crisp against my cheeks. I stopped at a local art supply store, the bell above the door chiming merrily. The scent of linseed oil, graphite, and paper enveloped me, a smell from a childhood dream I had abandoned when my father died, and the financial weight of the world fell on my teenage shoulders. "Good morning, Victoria," Mr. Henderson greeted me from behind the counter. He was an older man, with spectacles perched precariously on his nose. "Back for the sable brushes?" I smiled, moving toward the display. "I think I'm ready for them, and maybe a few tubes of the cerulean blue." "Excellent choice. That blue sings," he said, coming around the counter to help me. "You know, that sketch you showed me last week, the one of the city skyline, it had real perspective. You have a good eye." I felt a flush of heat rise to my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the unfamiliar sensation of praise. "Thank you. I used to draw all the time, before." "Well," said Mr. Henderson, handing me the brushes, "never too late to pick up the thread. That's the beauty of art. It waits for you." It waits for you.
The words echoed in my mind as I paid. I didn't haggle. I didn't worry that this purchase would mean skipping lunch for a week. I tacked my card, the machine beeped in approval, and I walked out with a paper bag that weighed nothing but held everything. I spent the afternoon in the park, sitting on a bench that overlooked the small lake. I set up a sketchbook on my lap. The water was still, reflecting the weeping willows that lined the bank. I picked up a charcoal stick, feeling the dust coat my fingertips. For an hour, I lost myself. I wasn't Victoria, the provider, the doormat, or the bank account. I was just a hand connecting eye to paper. I sketched the curve of a duck's neck, the jagged line of the distant trees, the ripples in the water. Is that the lake? I jumped slightly, looking up to see a woman standing nearby walking a golden retriever. She smiled apologetically. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. It's just, that's really good." I looked down at my drawing. It was good. Rough, yes, but alive. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just practicing." "Well, you've got talent," she said, giving a little wave before the dog tugged her forward. "Have a beautiful day." "You too," I called back. I watched her walk away. A normal interaction. No strings attached, no hidden agenda. It was exhilarating. As the sun began to dip, painting the sky in hues of violet and burnt orange, I packed up my supplies and headed home. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A reflex of terror shot through me, the old conditioning dying hard. Is it them? Is it an emergency? I pulled it out. It was a text from Sarah, a colleague I had befriended at the new office. "Hey, a few of us are grabbing dinner at that Italian place on 4th. Want to come? No pressure." I stared at the screen. A dinner, with friends, not serving dinner to my mother while she critiqued the salt content, not watching my sister pick at a $30 entree she demanded but wouldn't eat. I typed back, "I'd love to. See you at 7. The evening was a blur of laughter, garlic bread, and red wine. I sat at a round table with 3 other women, listening to them complain about dating apps and discuss office politics. I contributed, I laughed, I existed. "So, Victoria," Sarah asked, pouring a little more wine into my glass, "what's your story? You're always so mysterious. Where were you before you came to the firm?" The table quieted down, eyes turning to me with friendly curiosity. I paused, twirling the stem of the glass. The old Victoria would have deflected, ashamed of the chaos she came from. The new Victoria, however, felt a strange sense of detachment from that history. It was a scar, not an open wound. "I was stuck," I said carefully, choosing my words. I was in a situation where I was responsible for everyone but myself. I was keeping a sinking ship afloat by bailing water with a teaspoon. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "That sounds exhausting." "It was," I admitted, looking her in the eye. "I lost a lot of years to it, but I realized that if I didn't jump ship, I was going to drown with them. So I left. I started over. And now," I gestured to the table, to the food, to the smiling faces, "now I'm here." "To jumping ship," another colleague, Jenna, said, raising her glass. "To learning to swim," I added, clinking my glass against hers. Walking home later that night, the city felt different. It wasn't a hostile labyrinth of obligations anymore. It was a playground. I stopped at a bodega and bought a bouquet of tulips, just because. When I unlocked the door to my apartment, the silence greeted me again, but this time it felt like a warm embrace. I placed the tulips in a vase on the counter and kicked off my shoes. I walked to the large window that looked out over the city lights. From here, I could see the distant neighborhood where I used to live. Somewhere in that grid of lights, my mother and sister were likely sitting in the dark, or perhaps arguing about who was to blame for their current circumstances. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was distant, like a memory of a pain rather than the pain itself. I knew with absolute certainty that their decline was not my fault. I had given them every chance, every penny, every ounce of my youth. They had consumed it all and asked for more. I had witnessed them a few months ago, arguing in a grocery store, looking disheveled and frantic. That image had seared itself into my mind, but not as a call to action. It was a confirmation. If I had stayed, I would have been that disheveled woman screaming about coupons, hollowed out by resentment. I turned away from the window, away from the past. I went into my bedroom, which was decorated in soft blues and grays. I sat on the edge of the bed, a mattress that didn't sag, with sheets that smelled of lavender. I opened my nightstand drawer and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. I uncapped a pen and turned to a fresh page. Entry 154. Today I bought sable brushes. Today I drew the lake. Today I told my story without shame. I am not a machine. I am not a wallet. I am not a burden. I paused, the pen hovering over the paper. The word burden had been the catalyst, the knife my mother had used to cut me loose. She had meant it to destroy me. Instead, she had set me free. I wrote the final line, pressing the ink hard into the paper. I am Victoria, and this view, this silence, this peace, this is my own horizon. I closed the book and set it down. I turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. But it wasn't the suffocating darkness of my old life. It was a restful, restorative dark. I lay back, pulling the duvet up to my chin. For the first time in forever, my mind didn't race with a to-do list for tomorrow. My only obligation was to rest, to dream, and to wake up when the sun decided to rise. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, the future didn't look like a tunnel. It looked like the sky, wide, open, and limitless.